Okay, imagine if you will, you go on a ketogenic or perhaps even a carnivore diet and suddenly you feel phenomenal. Decades-long disease starts to go in remission. Your brain works better. You feel better. Inflammation's gone. You get off a bunch of medications and then 3 months, 6 months later, you get some labs and things are looking pretty good, except one thing. Your cholesterol is sky high. Your doctor tells you, hey, this diet clearly isn't working for you. Perhaps you should do something else. Maybe we put you on some medications or something along those lines, or to encourage you to stop that. Now, most of you, many of you probably don't have to imagine that because it's probably happened to you. Well, there's new data out there which may shed some light on this particular situation, which I think is quite interesting. So let me share that with you. Okay, I want you guys to pay attention because this gets a little bit complicated, but I'm gonna try to make it as simple as I possibly can. So if you check out this image here, this image shows a person that has seen clear reversal of cardiovascular disease in their cardiac vessels. This is, basically regression of plaque in the arteries. Now, where did that image come from? Well, it came from a patient who was on a ketogenic diet, who had a ridiculously high amount of LDL cholesterol, ridiculously high amount of ApoB, a ridiculously high amount of total cholesterol. They all kind of represent more or less the same thing. And despite really, really high levels of cholesterol, this person was able to see a reduction in plaque. This is soft plaque. This is non-calcified plaque. This is a plaque that's considered to be unstable and can rupture and lead to things like heart attacks and strokes. So this is a very important finding. Okay, so some of you that have been following me for a while are probably aware of this particular study. It was called the KetoCa study. Now, it is being released in parts. This isn't the whole study hasn't released. They released some early data earlier this year, and it was very controversial. And for the reason is that in that particular segment, some of the patients had significant progression of their cardiovascular disease. And people were saying, oh, it shows that keto is bad, and this means that, you progress well. And the author said, well, let's look at the data closely, because they had a lot more data to release yet. It all wasn't out there, and they had some insight into this. And so basically what they made the statement was that the progression of cardiovascular disease, that is the accumulation of plaque, had no relationship to the amount of LDL cholesterol that was there. A lot of people said, well, because everybody was high, it doesn't matter. There's this threshold. Once you get above a certain amount, it really doesn't matter what you have. But if you look a little more closely, and they've done this, they show the largest spread of LDL cholesterol ever examined, basically in any study. And despite that large spread, even some people into the normal ranges, there was absolutely no correlation between LDL cholesterol and the progression of plaque in this particular cohort of patients. Now, it gets more interesting from here. Okay, so now they've released data from several different analyses that were done. So this data set originally was supposed to be interpreted using something called Q-angiography or Q-angio. This is a precision CT angiography using AI, which has been used as kind of a standard across some of the cardiovascular imaging world. And that was the initial intent. Now, they released some data from a company called Clearly ahead of time, and this showed this what appeared to be higher progression. But since that time, they've reanalyzed it using two different AI methods, both of which showed essentially the same result, which showed a very modest increase in plaque to the point where it was considered low. In fact, this is where it really gets interesting. And so because both of these studies showed the exact same thing, and the Clearly was such an outlier, they're going back and saying, hey, maybe we should validate the data from Clearly. That so far, to my knowledge, has not been done yet, but it may show that there's perhaps a problem with that data set. Again, that remains to be seen. But anyway, so we've got this, this several studies, like 3 or 4 different examinations of the data, all pointing to the same thing, not much progression. And in fact, this is where it gets really interesting. Several other patients, in fact, on the heart flow study, I think up to 33 out of the 100 patients saw a reversal of their cardiovascular disease, right? That's powerful. That's really interesting, And again, remember who we're talking about. We're talking about people with ridiculously high cholesterol, where every bit of knowledge that we have at this point would suggest significant progression, or at least, moderate progression and not regression. That's saying the disease reversed in people with high cholesterol. So what can we take away from this? First of all, the thing I would like to say is I don't think you can just blindly say I'm on a ketogenic diet, my cholesterol is high, I can just ignore it. I've never said that. I won't say that. I think it means you need to get more information, perhaps some imaging, and perhaps as this data continues to evolve, we'll be able to better predict who is likely to regress or not progress versus those people that might progress, because some of those patients still did progress. Very similar to a kind of a random sample of patients out there. So it's kind of an interesting time. When I think about quality of life and improving, I think there's a number of things we need to look at that I would look at probably before messing with LDL cholesterol. So if I were to say, what would I worry about with regard to things I can fix regarding my health? The number one thing I would say is I would lose obesity, particularly around the belly. If you've got belly fat, man or woman, it is absolutely critically important that you lose that. That is probably one of the healthiest things you can do for yourself. Beyond that, I would start getting stronger. I think that also is incredibly important for longevity, for overall quality of life, far more than I'd worry about any particular lab marker. I would get stronger. I would get physically fit, cardiovascularly fit. And again, when we talk about plaque regression, removing soft plaque from our vessels, we know that exercise can help remove that. That has been shown, time and time again in studies. So that's another important thing to do. From there, I would look at improving my metabolic health. And so that, again, some of that has to do with what we've already talked about by getting fit, leaner and stronger, better glycemic control. So if your blood glucose is unstable or runs high, then I would work on improving that. I would look at decreasing inflammatory stuff. I would look to bring my blood pressure down. These things are probably far more important for your health, for your longevity, and even your cardiovascular health than is, manipulating your LDL cholesterol. I think that is supported by a number of studies out there, particularly, a study that was done on 50,000 women a few years back, the Women's Health Initiative, where they showed that diabetes was by far, by an order of tenfold more important than things like LDL cholesterol. So that is where I would start. And I think, we can't totally ignore LDL cholesterol or ApoB or whatever measurement you like to focus on. But we really have to realize, as this study has shown, and many other studies out there have shown, it is a nuanced topic that requires not sort of this knee-jerk, everybody with high cholesterol needs to be put on medications and get it as low as possible, as many out there will propose. There are plenty of proponents of that think that the lower it is, the longer you can keep it really low, the better the outcome's going to be. And there is some data to support that, but I don't think it is something we can blanket apply to every single person. I think there's some problems with that. If you'd like to learn more, and if you'd like to have physicians that get this, that understand that there is nuance here, check out our physicians at Revero. We are licensed in all 50 states. We are taking patients. We are getting them off medications. We are putting their disease into remission. If you prefer that approach than the typical put everybody on pills for the rest of their life type of situation, which most of healthcare has devolved into, then please check out Revero.com. If you'd like to further support what we're doing and help us to reach a larger and larger population set, then consider investing, becoming part owner in Revero by going to republic.com/Revero. The links are both below. Check these things out. I appreciate you listening. And there's more to come on this cholesterol stuff. I can assure you. It's interesting to see. The next couple of years are going to be very interesting. All right, guys. Talk to you later.